Okay, we're going to go live. We'll get started here in a minute. It's not quite 1 o'clock yet here in Ohio, but we're going to start in just a second. And I'll explain kind of how this is going to go. And we'll take some breaks to do some Q&A in between some of these. I did not create this tier list, so I didn't choose the generals that are on there. For example, I can see right off the bat, I don't see Nathan Bedford Forrest anywhere, and I think he probably should have been on this list. Certainly one of the top 40 or so generals. But, and of course, they don't have names on them. And I know almost every one of these faces, but there's a handful of them I'm not sure about. So I may ask for the crowd to help me out with identifying a few of these faces on this. Adam, I'm doing great. How about yourself? Hope everybody's doing good. Yeah, Chip, I'm excited for the Mr. Beat collab as well. That's coming the day after tomorrow. And that'll be over on his channel. No, I don't think Turner Ashby's going to be on here. I wouldn't put him in my top 50 or so generals. Pedram, I don't really talk about current events and modern stuff on the channel, though I do have some strong opinions about that. So we'll get started in just a second. Monkey mapping, Lancaster, PA. Very cool. Where's Iron Man and Captain America? Beattyville, Kentucky. No way. Snapshot in history. That's awesome. My roots are there. My paternal line runs through St. Helens, Kentucky. In fact, the house that my my direct male line great-great-great-great-great-grandfather built is still in St. Helens, Kentucky. And that's right by Beattyville, I think. Very cool. Were there Civil War generals born in Pennsylvania? A lot of them. Just off the top of my head, Meade, Hancock, Reynolds. There's a lot more than that, but those are the first three that came right to mind right away. Confederate General John Pemberton was from Pennsylvania. Where can you get the jacket I was wearing in the Fredericksburg battle video? What was I wearing? You know what? That was a $30 jacket from Walmart. I paid $30 for that. It was just a simple zip up. It was like a knockoff of a North Face jacket or something like that. Is Jimmy Carter too modern? No, not really. Is there technology to read word down gravestones? Yeah, there is some. All right, so we're gonna get started, and I'm gonna ask you. We'll do some Q&A, and I'll stop every so often and let you know the Q&A time. So I'm gonna ask you to hold any questions that don't relate to Civil War generals until I open it up to kind of a general question and answer time. Ohio does have the best Civil War generals. Grant, Sherman, McPherson. Who else do we have from Ohio? I'm trying to think. I know there were more than that. Wyatt, thank you so much. Who's my favorite Civil War general? Grant. We can just start off immediately by putting McClellan in F. In Yorkshire, very cool. I am going to be watching the new Abraham Lincoln program. I've liked the series they've done. Whoa, John Wells, you're in Accrington? That's amazing. I've got such incredible respect for the Accrington Pals since I visited the site where they were massacred at the Somme. They did this series. They did Washington, they did Grant, and now they're doing Lincoln, and they've all been fantastic. So, real quick. Your history teacher is mistaken if she believes Abner Doubleday invented baseball, because he definitely did not. Eric, I disagree that McPherson's overrated, but we'll get to him. All right, so I'm going to run through these real quick, and I'll tell you which ones I know who they like, because they just have faces. They don't have names. I know almost all of them, but there's a few I'm not sure about, so I'm going to put you guys on knowing them, so when I get to them in the order, maybe the crowd can help me figure out who they are. So I know we've got Albert Sidney Johnston, A.P. Hill, Nathaniel Banks, that's Pgt Beauregard, that's Braxton Bragg. We've got Oh gosh, Burnside, Ambrose Burnside, E.M. Baller, thank you. No, he's not. Benjamin Butler. This is the first one I'm not sure about. I don't think I've seen that picture before. I'm sure I recognize him, but D.H. Hill, Jubal Early, Richard Yule. I'm not sure who these two are either. So there's three in that top row I'm not sure about. Second row, Henry Halleck, Irvin McDowell. I want to say that's not Hughie, is it? I'm not sure. I'm not sure who these two are here. We've got John Bell Hood, Stonewall Jackson, Joe Johnston, Phil Kearney, Robert E. Lee, James Longstreet, McClellan. I think that's Magruder. I want to say that's Wade Hampton, but that doesn't entirely look like the portrait I'm used to seeing of him. That's McPherson, Meade, Sickles. I think that's Pemberton. George Pickett. That's Leonidas Polk. I think that's John Pope. I want to say that's Fitzjohn Porter, but I'm not 100% sure of that. I don't know who that is. That's John Reynolds, William Rosecrans, Ulysses S. Grant. I recognize that one, but I'm not 100% sure. It almost looks a little like Garfield, but I don't think it is. Phil Sheridan, William Tecumseh Sherman. This guy I recognize, but I'm drawing a blank at the moment. Jeb Stewart. That's a Union Corps commander, but I can't remember his name. George Thomas and Winfield Scott Hancock. So, was it Hardee? Okay, it's Hardee. But I'll have you guys shout out those names when we get to those. Yeah, the beards are great. Patrick, is that Patrick Claiborne right there? Because I thought maybe that was Claiborne, but that wasn't the picture I was used to seeing of him. I figured Claiborne had to be on there. Yeah, that's okay. Claiborne is kind of what I thought, but I've always seen a picture of him that looked different than that. So, all right. So anyway, we'll go in order, and when we get to this, actually, no, Ethan, the creator of Coca-Cola, was not a Confederate general. He had the same name as a Confederate general. The creator of Coca-Cola and the Confederate general were two different guys with the same exact name, including middle initial. Yeah. Sports conciliary. That's what I said. I didn't create this list, and I definitely would have had Forrest in there if I was making the list. All right, so Hardee's next to Yule. Where's Yule? Let's see. Let's go back and find where Yule is. Yule's up here in the top row. There's no Hardee next to Yule. Because that's Yule right there, and that's Jubal Early. And Hardee was a Confederate general. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with Albert Sidney Johnston, because he's where's the guy with the awful statue? I don't think that statue's there anymore. American President's Ranking is coming out Monday. We're doing a tier list on Mr. Beats channel, and then I think I'm going to host him in a few months on my channel doing a stream where we do like a fantasy draft kind of thing where we each take turns picking a president, and then you guys get to vote on who has the best presidential lineup. Sherman's here. Hooker should be here too. That's another one I would have added to this list. Absolutely, Joe Hooker should be on this list. So what I'll do is those couple of generals that aren't on this list, I will tell you where I would have put them, even though whoever created this tier list did not add them. So Albert Sidney Johnston, he's killed right at the start of the war. He is considered by many people at that point to be the South's best general. He's one of, I think, only two field commanders in the war who were actually generals before the war started. Johnston was one. The other one would be Joe Johnston. The two Johnstons. Joe Johnston was, I think, a brigadier general in the U.S. Army, and Albert Sidney Johnston had been a general in the Texas Army. Hardee's next to McDowell. All right, let me find where McDowell is again. McDowell was up here. Yeah, that is Hardee. Okay, I thought maybe that's who that was. No, Wikipedia. If Wikipedia says that the John C. Pemberton that was the Civil War general who invented Coca-Cola, Wikipedia is wrong. I assure you, John C. Pemberton, who defended Vicksburg, the Confederate general, did not invent Coke. It was a different guy with the same name. I think John C. Pemberton was in the Confederate Army, but he was not a general. Austin, we're going to go through Obama on the ranking. So here's the thing. Albert Sidney Johnston. It's tough to judge him because he was killed so early in the war. He's killed by friendly fire at the Battle of Shiloh, very recklessly leading troops into the field. But for what he did at that point, coming out of Corinth and surprising Grant's army at Shiloh was a brilliant strategic move, and I think that the South would have been better off in the West if he had been around. But I just don't think we know enough to be able to say, a lot of these generals, because they got killed when they did, they get romanticized a little bit. Like, people think more highly of them than I think they otherwise would have. I think they'd be judged more critically if they hadn't died. We do that a lot with other people too, like we do it with John F. Kennedy. I think a lot of the romanticism surrounding John F. Kennedy has to do with the fact that he was assassinated in the middle of his first term. So I'm going to put Johnston as a B. I just don't think we have enough data to be able to rank him any higher than that, but the limited amount we did have, I think, was pretty good. Yes, John Stith Pemberton was an American pharmacist and Confederate States Army veteran. Yes, but he was not the general. John C. Pemberton's the general, and a terrible one, and he's on this list. I could argue maybe even a C for Albert Sidney Johnston. Getting killed by friendly. And think about the three highest ranking Confederates to be killed or wounded during the war was friendly fire. Stonewall Jackson, Albert Sidney Johnston, and James Longstreet. I mean, there were other of equal rank, but Longstreet was hit by friendly fire too. We'll talk about Robert E. Lee when we get to him. All right, we're on to A.P. Hill. A.P. Hill was also killed in the war, but he was killed in the last week of the war. Very sad situation. He's shot like 3 or 4 days before the surrender at Appomattox, and it was a very, very sad situation. The Coca-Cola one was at Vicksburg. That's interesting. Under another guy named John Pemberton. He probably couldn't have done any worse as a general. A.P. Hill, excellent division commander. The reason he got promoted to Corps Command was in large part to his performance as a division commander. So very, very good division commander. And you're going to find with some of these guys that they were very good at one role, but because of their performance in that role, they got promoted and didn't do as well at the higher role. A.P. Hill is a perfect example of that. Excellent division commander. Another one would be John Bell Hood. Excellent division commander, not a good Army commander. Was contentious with his superiors, did not play well with others at some points. Custer just not high ranking enough, I think, to be on this list. So A.P. Hill, I'm going to balance his performance as a division commander with his later roles, and I'm going to kind of punt on him a little bit and give him a C. Cynical optimist, thank you. I am sorry you've had a trash week. I hope it gets better for you. My weekend did not start off well because West Brom played terribly against Luton today. So I think their season's pretty much over with. I think they're going to be in the championship again next year. Video with Mr. Beat is 3 p.m. Eastern on Monday. Yeah, Jackson had a lot of people arrested, though. I don't judge people too much on the fact that they didn't get along well with Stonewall Jackson, because that applies to a lot of people. Some people just not cut out for higher positions, and they're better off right where they are. We're going to get to Pickett. All right, so we're on to Nathaniel Banks. Now, Banks is an interesting story because not a lot of people know about him because he was kind of relegated to roles in parts of the war that people don't talk about. Like, he wasn't in any of the major battles for the most part. He was leading smaller independent forces, places like Louisiana, things like that. He eventually, I think, is brought east by Grant. But he was trusted regularly with independent command, which says a lot about what people thought of him, and by and large performed pretty well in those independent commands. I can't really think of anything too negative to say about Banks. Janitor, I have been fantastic. I hope you are as well. Banks did fight Jackson in the Valley, and like a lot of people, didn't do very well there. But yeah, so he was never really in, like, he wasn't at places like Gettysburg or Vicksburg. The funny thing is, his rank in relation to Ulysses S. Grant played a part, I think, in him not getting fame he otherwise might have had, because the original plan at Vicksburg called for Grant to meet up with Banks, who had an army further south down the Mississippi River, and then together their two forces were supposed to march on Vicksburg. The problem was, for Grant, Banks outranked him. So if Grant had met up with Banks, Banks would have been in command of the Vicksburg campaign. It worked out that they didn't do that, and then, of course, Grant takes Vicksburg, gets promoted above everybody. Became governor of Massachusetts after the war. A lot of these guys had post-war careers in... Napoleon Bonaparte Buford was the brother of John Buford, the Union general. The Red River Campaign alone, Alexander Wilson, that's fair. Banks is going to be another C for me, and there are going to be a lot of C's, I think. Banks has some pretty good moments, no outstanding moments, and no, I don't think, complete, utter failure, disaster moments. Some bad moments, some good moments, so he ends up a C for me, I think. All right, so we are on to Pgt Beauregard. Beauregard's one of those guys who was always right at the top. He's one of the first people promoted to 4-star general in the Confederate Army. So he was always one of the highest ranking officers. Honestly, Beauregard's a guy who, for me, I can't think of any huge mistakes that he made. Like, he didn't jump out and, like, wow anybody with his tactics on the battlefield, but very competent, I think. Eric, why do you say that about the list? Michael, I agree. Meade is criminally underrated. We'll get there. Yeah, Banks wasn't bad for a political general. You're right. Most of the political generals were not so good. So Beauregard for me is a B. Not like crazy great, but not really ever below average. I feel like he was very competent. Why is Longstreet so low on my list? I didn't put Longstreet on my list yet. I've got Johnston, Beauregard, Hill, and Banks, and that's it. I'm not sure what you're talking about. General Meade stayed in the Army after the war. He only died I think he died in 1872. Okay, so we're on to Braxton Bragg. Here we go. Everyone has strong opinions on Braxton Bragg. Dan, you keep saying, why is Longstreet so low? I don't know what you're talking about. Longstreet's not on my list yet. How to be president after war. Be a veteran of the war. Be from Ohio. Have some fancy facial hair. Yeah, accurate. Who would win a fight, Teddy Roosevelt or Grant? Probably Teddy Roosevelt. Janitor, I appreciate that. Thank you. Braxton Bragg, it's D or F for me. I don't think he's quite as awful as a lot of people say he is, but he's pretty bad. The picture of Hill is Longstreet. No, I don't know what you're talking about, my man. That is A.P. Hill. I don't know what you're talking about at all. That is absolutely 100% Ambrose Powell Hill. Longstreet is... I'll show you where Longstreet... There's Longstreet right there. Not even close to the same person. Is Grant by Ron Chernow accurate? Yes, absolutely. Bragg does have an awesome beard. He's got like the unibrow going on, which is kind of cool too. I think we're getting a little bit of a issue with our stream here. It's super ridiculously windy here right now. It's not the same picture at all. All right, I think we're good now. I'll give it a second to make sure. Okay. Audio's good, video's bad. Okay, well, we'll keep pressing on then. Crazy bad weather today, and sometimes I don't know why. I'm not entirely sure how it works like that, but it's really super windy. All right, so Ambrose Burnside. So Ambrose Burnside is another one of those interesting people. Curtis Springer, yeah, you're right up the road from me. Some pretty bad weather all over the place. I know Europe got some bad weather too. Burnside, I think, is better than a lot of people give him credit for. Pretty solid Corps commander. Had some bad moments as an Army commander, and I think nobody knew more than he did that he wasn't cut out for Army command, and said, in fact, when he was given command of the Army of the Potomac, it was said that he wept like a child, because he had no interest whatsoever in that. And no, I'm not still in Verdun, whoever asked. I got home 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago today I got home from France. You have a friend who's married to a direct descendant of Braxton Bragg. That's crazy. Burnside, for me, is at least a C. I might even put him B, but he's going to probably end up C. Supposedly, too, Burnside was at Ford's Theater the night that Lincoln was assassinated, sitting right below the presidential box, and some people claim that Lincoln was actually looking in Burnside's direction when he was shot. Yeah, I think Burnside does get blamed for some things that were not his fault. For example, Fredericksburg. I don't put that on Burnside. The pontoon boats weren't sent by Halleck nearly on time. He was expecting those weeks before he actually got them. The attack plan that he had for Fredericksburg was actually a pretty good one, but the left wing failed miserably, which is why Marie's Heights became the debacle that it did. So I don't blame Burnside for the disaster of Fredericksburg at all. So, yeah, I'll go with a C for Burnside. I might have given him a B minus. S tier facial hair. Hey, and he's where we get the term sideburns from, so you got to give him credit for that. I don't talk about modern stuff, guys, so if you're asking, I'm not going to answer that. Good old Bernie. All right, Benjamin Butler, another politician turned general, turned back into a politician after the war. I am not a huge fan of Benjamin Butler. I think he was pretty poor. He's the guy who, for a while, commanded New Orleans and kind of ruled it pretty strictly. And at one point, they had a situation where women were dumping their chamber pots out onto Union soldiers on the streets. And he issued a proclamation that any woman caught doing such a thing would be arrested and treated like she was a prostitute. I think the exact term was treated like ladies of the town. But I'm not a huge fan of Benjamin Butler at all. I can't think of anything particularly outstanding that he did during the war. Yeah, Butler's an F for me, I think. Benjamin says, Butler has a nice first name, though. There you go. No high-ranking generals had my name, Chris, so I don't know. Beards are the superior way of deciding tactics. I like it. We should make a card game out of these guys. Nice. What's my favorite Civil War film? Glory. They did put Benjamin Butler's face in those chamber pots. You're right. Benjamin Button aged backwards, I believe. Yeah, we'll do some World War I and World War II generals lists someday. I don't see Paul, so I can't see what his profile pic is. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain did well as a brigade commander, and then he was a division commander late in the war, I believe. Sherman tanks are named after General Sherman. All of our tanks, I think, are named after generals. Why is Karl Marx in the middle row? I think that's Wade Hampton, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay, Patrick Claiborne. I think he was killed at Franklin late in the war. Solid general. He's a guy who I think performed quite well at every level where he was. I can't think of any situation where he wasn't really, really good. I'm not sure if... and I think you guys, by talking about whoever this is that has... I don't see in the chat, so I don't know why it's not showing up for me. But... the more you guys talk about it, the more attention you're giving to him, so just ignore him. But I don't know if I could put Claiborne at S tier. But yeah, I don't. There must be some reason why you guys are seeing it and I'm not. But I don't see anybody with a swastika in the chat. Claiborne, I'll give an A though. Solid everywhere he performed. He's one of those rare people that did well in whatever task he was given, I think. Yeah, he was killed at Franklin. S is like superior. It's like above A. I could understand, and I wouldn't have a strong argument against somebody who ranked Claiborne S tier. But I'm going to reserve that for very few, I think. Yeah, definitely look up Claiborne. Claiborne's a guy who's getting a lot of love in modern times from Civil War historians. I think a lot of people are revisiting Claiborne and kind of really pumping him up a lot lately. S equals super duper. Yeah, Jelly Bruno, I know. Please quit talking about it. And I don't see it anyway. I think somebody already timed him out, which is why I'm not seeing it. One of our mods already took care of it, so just quit talking about it. All right, D.H. Hill. D.H. Hill is, he and Stonewall Jackson, I think, were married to sisters in the same family. So they weren't technically brother-in-laws, but like D.H. Hill was Jackson's wife's brother-in-law and vice versa. Steve, it's already been taken care of. DHL is a tough one because, again, he's one of those guys who he angered the wrong people. You know, some of these people kind of find themselves on the outside looking in or on the inside when they shouldn't be based on their connections to generals and politicians. And D.H. Hill was one of those ones who I really feel like never really got a chance to show what he could do because of that. Oh, that's Lafayette McLaws. You're right. Absolutely. That is McLaws. Thank you, Jeff. So DHL is going to be a C for me just because I feel like we don't know what he might have done. He commanded a general sometimes. Snapping Turtle McGee for S. All right, we're on to Jubal Early. Okay, Jubal Early is an interesting one. He's one of those people that there doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground with. A lot of people either really love him or really hate him. I'm not a huge fan of Jubal Early. If you're talking about Hearts of Iron 4, dude, I have played a ton of that on my gaming channel. I've probably got 100 Hearts of Iron 4 videos on my gaming channel. Ricky, my interactions with Mr. Beat so far have gone really well, actually. We get along great. I think you guys will be surprised, even when we disagree, because I think we both respect each other quite a bit, and I think he's a really nice guy, and he's very friendly, and had a chance to talk to him on the phone the other day, and couldn't have been nicer. So, is it true that James Longstreet was engaged to George McClellan's wife, Alexander Wilson? Thank you for that. And I had not heard that. So if that's true, that's the first time hearing about it. That doesn't mean it's not true. Lee's bad old man gets downgraded for being a terrible person after the war. Yeah, I hear you there, JD. I'm not a huge fan of Jubal Early. He's going to be a D for me. He had a few good moments, but I don't know. When he had independent command, I don't think he did all that well with it. Yes, gaming channel, links in the description of all the videos. It's called History Guy Gaming. Actually, I've had that channel for about 5 years now. This is the new channel. I did watch Kingdom of Heaven. I thought it was good. Okay, we're on to Richard Yule. Here's another one of those guys who, the higher he got promoted, the worse he did. I'm only ranking them on their military performance in the Civil War, not on what kind of person they were. And that's interesting because when Matt Beat and I, his name's Matt, Mr. Beat and I were talking about the stream coming up on Monday about presidents. He said that when he did the top 10 and best and bottom 10 worst presidents, the one that I reacted to, that he was ranking them based on their whole lives, not just their career as president, which certainly affects the rankings, I think. So when we do it on Monday, we're going simply on their presidency and nothing else. Because, for example, and I'm getting off topic, I know, Jimmy Carter, I don't think was a great president. Phenomenal human being. I think Jimmy Carter and Ulysses S. Grant might be the two best human beings we've ever had as president. Just both incredibly good guys. So if you were asking me to rank Jimmy Carter on his life, that would be very different than ranking him on his presidency. Janitor, thank you for that. There were European military attaches on both sides. McClellan is on the list, Skinny Tim. So Yule, solid division commander, not a good corps commander. A lot like A.P. Hill. Both of those guys stepped into that role after Stonewall Jackson was killed. When Lee reorganized his army from 2 to 3 corps. And neither one really did great. Yule was wounded a couple times during the war, lost a leg, I think, at 2nd Manassas. So he's another one of those guys that first half of the war, division commander, solid, probably a B. After the war, corps commander, probably a D. So I'll give him a C. Yeah, Jimmy Carter's fantastic, man. He's like almost 100 years old. He's been dealing with brain cancer. He builds homes for Habitats for Humanity, teaches Sunday school. Super guy. The kind of person I'd want to have as my grandpa, not the person I want to be president. But we'll talk about that on Monday. I don't think there's any Navy commanders in here. Okay, this is one of the ones I'm not sure about. I can't tell from this picture who that is. Maybe somebody can help me with this one. We've got 500 people in the chat. I'm sure somebody's going to recognize who these next two guys are, because I just, off the top of my head, I'm losing, I'm drawing a blank on who these guys are. I got a few ideas of who they might be, but I'll give it a minute, and if you guys have any questions while we're figuring that out, great. If not, we'll skip ahead and we'll go on to some other ones from now. Yeah, he did burn Chambersburg, founded by my 6th great-grandfather. My great-grandma was a Chambers. Thank you so much. Love from India. Please do an Armchair Historians World War II from an Indian perspective. I will do that. We have a lot of followers on this channel from India, so I definitely want to show some love to our Indian followers. We'll definitely do some India history at some point in the near future. I promise it is coming, and thank you for that. Alexander, thank you. A.P. Hill was engaged to McClellan's wife. Okay, cool. That's not. It could be Sykes. It's not Sedgwick. I'm actually kind of surprised Sedgwick isn't in here. Is that Sykes? Is that who that is? Okay. It's George Sykes. All right, so George Sykes commanded the 5th Corps in the Army of the Potomac. Another one of those guys who's like competent, right? I mean, not like doesn't blow me away for anything he did, but solid. I don't know. He's an enigma to me because he kind of flies under the radar a lot too. I have done videos on how to research family tree. I did a couple of live streams about that. What van did I order? We have a Toyota Sienna. I'm not going to get into that kind of van life. We got it because we have 5 kids, 2 of whom are teenagers, and we needed the room, especially because we drive an hour to church every Sunday, and it's a long way to go when you're cramped into a smaller vehicle. So, yeah, we'll rank some other ones, other generals. Okay, Sykes is a B for me. Solid, but not outstanding, but I can't think of anything like negative that he did. I think he performed quite well. Competent. And honestly, in the Civil War, if you were competent, you were good. So, this next one, he looks familiar to me. Troy Robinson, thank you for that. Abner Doubleday did have, G.W. Smith, is that who that is? Okay. Did have a role in baseball. I think the reason people attribute it to him, I think he had a role in like helping organize the rules of baseball and helping, I don't know exactly, but he did have a part to play in baseball, but he didn't invent it. I think he just helped standardize the rules that were used. Gustavus Smith, okay. He's another one of those meh generals for me, G.W. Smith. So, come to your church in PA. We have coffee. Where's your church in PA? The Ohio Trinity of was Sheridan from Ohio, though? I thought Sheridan was from, like, New York or something. Now I'm kind of curious. We haven't gotten to him yet, but... Yeah, Phil Sheridan, he died on my birthday. He wasn't from Ohio. He was born in New York, died in Massachusetts. Oh, he grew up in Somerset, Ohio. Okay, so he grew up here. Cool. I don't like the name Civil War Guardians, Cleveland Guardians, Civil War Guardians. So he grew up here. So we'll claim him, if that's the case. I have been to Fort Steuben, down in Steubenville. Okay. 1861 to 65 was the American Civil War. All right, we're on to Henry Halleck. They called him Old Brains. He was a good general behind a desk. Not a good general in the field. His one venture into the field was when he came and took over command from Grant after the Battle of Shiloh and pretty much botched the Siege of Corinth. My birthday is August 5th. So are there any generals not from the U.S.? There are some that weren't born in the U.S., yeah. But Halleck... He had some good qualities. He was married, by the way, to Alexander Hamilton's granddaughter, which is kind of a fun fact I always like to throw out about Henry Halleck. Henry Halleck was he was made general-in-chief after McClellan until Grant became general-in-chief, and then he, I think, was like chief of staff. He was like the head guy in Washington after that. CK3's pretty much been every other day, not daily. Alexander Wilson, any books on the Civil War? Grant's autobiography is fantastic. Shelby Foote is a good storyteller if you want a Southern perspective. Bruce Catton's got some fantastic stuff. It just depends. Like, do you want an overview? Do you want details? That kind of thing. Yeah, he was a glorified desk clerk is a pretty good way of talking about Halleck. Halleck did have an arrogant, condescending quality to him, especially early on in his dealing with Grant. But at the same time, also kind of, I think, became an ally of Grant and ended up recognizing the quality of Grant, even if it took him a while. Am I a Civil War professor or writer? No. Most of the books I've written are family histories. Team of Rivals is fantastic. That's about Lincoln. It's a biography of Lincoln. Claiborne was born in Ireland. There's a good example. I'm doing great, Kieran. How about yourself? Halleck, we're going to have a lot of C's. I think Halleck had some really negative qualities that were balanced by some pretty positive ones. Yeah, Battle Cry of Freedom is going to be so much fun. I think next week they're doing like a free demo preview thing, so you might be able to access it. Yeah, we're going to get to Mcpherson. He's in here. No, he didn't like Sherman. I think only one of my books is actually on Amazon. It's a book I wrote about the Whittaker family who immigrated from England and Scotland to Ohio. That's the only one that's actually publicly available, I think, right now. Okay. Irvin Mcdowell. So, Irvin Mcdowell commands the Army of the Potomac. Well, it wasn't called the Army of the Potomac. It was the Army of Northern Virginia, I think, or maybe Army of Northeastern Virginia. It was the Army at First Bull Run. Honestly, I think he had a solid plan at Bull Run. He got outsmarted by Confederate intelligence and by Confederate movements. McDowell, I would give McDowell a B for his performance at Bull Run. The problem was he got beat by an A-plus performance on the Confederate side. It was competent on McDowell's part, I think. It was a good strategy. They feigned against the Stone Bridge and then went around and actually had some early success. It was only when the Second Army showed up that he completely was clueless was coming. And remember, these guys are dealing with very green, inexperienced forces on both sides. And you can't blame him for a lot of that. McDowell goes on to serve the rest of the war, and I think as a corps commander, and it did fairly well, I think. Yeah, Sven, I agree. Volunteers were too undertrained for his plan at Bull Run. You got a lot of friendly fire issues. People got all these weird-looking uniforms that makes it really hard to tell who's who. And he fell victim to some really good intelligence on the Confederate side, where the Confederates knew what was happening, got word of it, were able to sneak an army away from Harper's Ferry and get them over to Manassas, and pulled a fast one on him. Am I considering military actions outside of the Civil War? No, I'm going strictly on their Civil War performance. Latin American countries. I have been to, I don't know if Belize counts as Latin American, Honduras, Costa Rica, and Mexico. McDowell, I'm going to give him a B. I don't think he was bad. I think he was competent. Nobody did good against Jackson in the Valley, so I'm not going to judge him too much for that. Yeah, we'll do something on the New York City draft riot at some point. The lag on the webcam, are we having issues again? Everything looks okay on my end. Okay, we're on to, who do we say this is? Hardy? Let me take a look and double check here. There's a difference between when you guys see it and when I say it, so. Yeah, that's Hardy. Okay, William Hardy. He was an interesting one because he was very... Branden, thank you. Appreciate that. I've done a couple of Mark Felton's videos. So Hardy's interesting because he had a much greater influence on the war than people realize, because he wrote a lot of the books on tactics that were used by both sides. Felton's video on Patton's death was the one I did. Okay. So Hardy, performance-wise in the Civil War, yeah, there were a lot of Union generals who were Democrats, not just Hancock and McClellan. But he's another one of those C's for me. Decent, not great. All right, who's this guy? Is that Harney? Because I saw some people talking about Harney. That might be Harney. Which is funny because of the latest oversimplified video. No, it's not Harney. Harney had white hair. I don't know who that is. Missouri Backwoods Fishing. Yeah, Sterling Price. I've been to his grave out in St. Louis. And thank you, by the way. Louis Armisted's not on here now. He's only brigade commander. Is that Samuel P. Heintzelman? That's who that is. Okay. Heintzelman was killed. Oh, was he killed at Antietam? No, he didn't die at Antietam. He died in 1880. Okay. Another Pennsylvania general. It's not Garfield. Garfield wasn't that old. Garfield was like in his early 30s during the Civil War. So Samuel Heintzelman, there's a World War II ship named after him, by the way. We haven't gotten to any S tier yet. Harney gets a P for Pig War. Oh, and I think I figured out who one of these other guys is that we're going to get to later. So Heintzelman, he didn't really do much in the Civil War. Yeah, it's definitely worth going to Gettysburg again. Heintzelman, after the Peninsula Campaign, he just kind of drops off the face of the earth. So just read a little bit of his history here for you. After the 7 Days battles, he's promoted to Major General to rank from May 5th. His popularity and confidence in the Army were eclipsed by the aggressive nature of his subordinate division commanders, Joe Hooker and Phil Kearny. And after Second Bull Run, he was in command of the 3rd Corps. After Second Bull Run, he was relieved from command, judged as too old and insufficiently aggressive, which is kind of funny because he was not the oldest general, nor was he the least aggressive. But so I guess we're just going to have to put Heintzelman at D because he just really didn't do all that much. I don't know what to say about him. I think Cypher probably hates Woodrow Wilson slightly more than me. We're going to get to Pickett. All right, we're on to John Bell Hood. John Bell Hood, boy, there's no better example of somebody who was really good at one level of command and really bad at another. And I don't blame Hood completely for that. Jaron Wade, yeah, I think probably the reason I haven't done more Mark Felton is because I haven't done a lot of World War II content lately, and that's most of his stuff. I hope you feel better going through COVID right now. I haven't gotten to Buell. I don't even know if Buell's on this list. I don't see Buell on this list anywhere. John Bell Hood, in the span of a couple months, fights in the 2 bloodiest battles of the war and gets severely wounded at both of them. Loses the use of an arm leading his division at Gettysburg. Somehow, after getting severely wounded in July at Gettysburg, comes back in time to fight at Chickamauga 2 months later and loses a leg. I mean, there's nothing worse than getting severely wounded in the femur, which is where he gets hit. And so they amputated his leg right below the hip. So the guy loses an arm and a leg, basically, in the span of 2 months in the 2 worst battles of the war. And he was only in his early 30s at that point. And I just don't think he was ever the same after that. I feel like that affected a lot of his performance. I think up to that point, up to the time he got wounded, he was a really, really good general. And a lot of the problems that happened, I don't think were necessarily of his making. The janitor, yes, thank you. Garfield, both a general and a cat. I'm going to put Hood At C, I think he's an A for the first half of the war, and he's like a D minus for the last half of the war. So we'll give him a C overall. And Hood, if you ever go to Chickamauga and you see where he had to attack at Chickamauga, going up Snodgrass Hill is just ridiculous ask of his command. Open field, incredibly strong position that he was attacking. Dang. I mean, those two battles, Gettysburg and Chickamauga, his division, a lot was asked of them. I mean, they had to attack some pretty tough spots. I did a video from the spot. My video on Chickamauga, if you look on my channel, my video from the battlefield at Chickamauga, I was only there a few hours, so I didn't cover a lot. But I did a video from the spot where Hood's attack happened and where he was wounded. Stonewall Jackson, here we go. Yeah, it was... JD, that is an understatement, sir. His performance was less than awesome at Franklin. Yes, it was definitely less than awesome. And I think all of the Confederate generals who died at Franklin would be the first to say so. But I think a lot of it, yeah, C's too generous for Hood if we judge him on the last half of the war. But, man, he was so good the first half of the war. Irish Technical Thinker, thank you. Greetings to you as well. I hope to visit your amazing country at some point. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was a general. He was a brevet major general. You'll see pictures of him with 2 stars on his shoulders. So, yes, he was a general. Is my video with Mr. Beat? No, it's going to be a live stream on Monday. All right, here we go. I have played War of Rights quite a bit. All right, here we go. Stonewall Jackson. I'm going to say it. I'm a fan of Stonewall Jackson, and Stonewall Jackson, incredibly overrated. Incredibly overrated as a general. Definitely one of those guys who I think gets hyped a lot more than he otherwise would because of when and how he died. He happened to die at a moment of great achievement. But let's not overlook the fact that it was kind of a mixed bag before that. Great success at First Bull Run. I don't know how much of that was of his own making anyway. Great success in the Shenandoah Valley. Horrible in the 7 Days. Not great at Fredericksburg. Honestly, George Meade kicked his butt at Fredericksburg. All things being equal, Meade would have destroyed Jackson at Fredericksburg, and it was only because Meade didn't get the support that he needed. I don't know why the camera's lagging. It doesn't seem to be having any issues on my end. But yeah, he literally got... Okay, now it's lagging. I don't know what's going on there, guys. Let me take a look at things for a second. He literally got lost in the 7 days. But I'm not judging these guys based on their character or things like that. Steve D. Let's assume for a second he died of pneumonia, which I think it's debatable whether or not that's exactly what killed him. I think you got a good argument that it was. It was still pneumonia that was brought about by the fact that he got wounded. If he hadn't been wounded, he wouldn't have had pneumonia. So that's one of the things that's really tricky when you talk about causes of death. And this is a bit of a tangent here, but for example, the flu pandemic, we just talked about that, right? Influenza didn't kill most of those people. Pneumonia did. But they wouldn't have got pneumonia if they didn't have influenza. Influenza led to pneumonia, which is what killed them. So yeah, he probably did die of pneumonia, but it was pneumonia that happened because he got wounded. All right, Stonewall Jackson, I will give him an A. He's absolutely not an S tier, probably even an A minus for me. Shelby Foote was a product of his time and his upbringing and the place in which he lived. Yeah, I wouldn't say he was a straight lost causer, but he certainly leaned in that direction. Jackson the lemon sucker. Yes, he did love a good lemon. That was one of his many quirks. Yeah, exactly, Philip. AIDS doesn't kill people. AIDS leads to you dying from something else. That's true in a lot of cases with a lot of diseases. You know what? Honestly, I wouldn't even argue if somebody said B for Stonewall Jackson. Kendall Brady, thank you. Appreciate that. I want to visit the Perryville battlefield in Kentucky at some point. That's definitely a battle I want to cover when I get a chance. What am I drinking? It's sparkling ice drink. It's like a caffeine drink that has 0 calories. We get them on Amazon. My kids love them. 0 sugar. So, all right, we're on to Joe Johnston. And I highly recommend that you read General Grant's autobiography. I don't know if there's a general he speaks more highly of on the Confederate side than Joe Johnston. I think he definitely thought Joe Johnston was a better general than Robert E. Lee. But what AIDS does is it's an acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So it compromises your immune system to where other things that normally wouldn't kill you can kill you. So you end up dying from something else that another person's body could have easily fought off. Sponsor time? Yeah, I wish. So Joe Johnston, I think, is probably better, and I'm going simply on the fact that a lot of the times Joe Johnston, by the time he's given command, and part of his problem was he and Jefferson Davis didn't see eye to eye, and I don't think Davis liked him, and that held him back from command. Like, for example, if Joe Johnston's in command at Vicksburg, boy, you see a totally different Vicksburg campaign. It does not go down the way that it did. Snooper Bob is right. Jefferson Davis would give Johnston a Z tier if he could. But I think Johnston, I think he's solid. And I think Grant certainly thought he was solid. And yes, that is true, what was just mentioned. He was a pallbearer in Sherman's funeral. Went without his hat in some pretty bad weather, and some people told him, hey, you ought to put your hat on. And he said, if I were in Sherman's position and he were in mine, he wouldn't be wearing his hat. And he died a few days later. He got pneumonia and died. Johnston's a B for me. Okay, Phil Kearny's an interesting one. I just visited his grave when I was at Arlington, and it's kind of funny, JD, if you're still in here. I saw your interview with Sarah the other day on Instagram, and you were talking about Arlington, and you mentioned some specific videos you wanted to do for Arlington. Well, I shot a whole series in Arlington when I went to Gettysburg back in November, but it hasn't gone live on the channel yet because as soon as I got done with my Gettysburg series, I started my France series. So I've got like 7 videos from Arlington waiting to be edited and going up. And some of the things that JD talked about he was going to do from Arlington, like a video on Medal of Honor recipients, a video on women. Those are 2 of the videos and a video on the Civil War. Those are 3 of my videos that I'm going to do from Arlington. But I went and covered all the Civil War generals that were there, and Phil Kearny's one of those. Kearny's another one of those great what ifs for me. Kearny lost an arm, I think, in the Mexican War. Kearny, cool story in my own family. My great-great-great-grandfather, his name was George Greenhill. His name was Enoch Greenhill. He changed it to George when he came to America. He's from Birmingham, England, and he immigrated to the United States in 1848. And the day he stepped off the boat in New York, he enlisted in the 2nd U.S. Dragoons. Apparently that was a thing that happened. People enlisted the moment they arrived in America. And I saw on his enlistment that the officer who enlisted him was Philip Kearny. And I thought, I wonder if that's the same guy. And so I go and look, and Phil Kearny was indeed an enlistment officer in New York City in 1848. So he's the guy that signed up my 3rd great-grandfather. I think it's very likely that Phil Kearny could have ended up in command of the Army of the Potomac at some point. That said, there are certainly some people who probably would have opposed to that. He was a very aggressive general to the point where he rubbed some people the wrong way. What he did at the 7 days concerning McClellan was probably borderline insubordination. He probably could have been court-martialed for some of the stuff that he said and the way he acted toward a superior officer there. But Birmingham is grim today. I'd stay away. Yeah, I've heard that. But if Kearney, I will say this: if Kearney had been in charge, and so, a lot of people pronounce it Kearney, it may be Kearney. I say Kearney most of the time. And yes, Eric's absolutely right. We'll get to Grant. Grant was not an alcoholic in the strictest sense of the word. He was more a binge drinker, I think, is a more, and I don't know the difference, if there is a difference, but binge drinker more accurately describes Grant, I think. But if Kearney had been in command at the 7 days, Richmond falls. I believe that 110% to be true. If Kearney is in command instead of McClellan, Richmond falls. No doubt about it. Kearney is much more in the vein of Grant when it comes to being aggressive and being willing to use the army to end the war. Steve D., thank you. Samuel Cooper, he did outrank Lee. No, he was kind of more of a desk general, a lot like Halleck was. And Lee was early on until he was put in command during the 7 days. I'm a Kearney fan, but I think because he was killed at Chantilly during the Second Bull Run campaign, we don't really know 100% for sure. So, incomplete, which is why I'll put him at B. Why let a little court-martial get away in career? Technically, Dan Sickles was not court-martialed. He probably could have been, but he didn't. A high-functioning alcoholic, yeah. All right, Robert E. Lee, here we go. The other thing is with Grant, not only was he a binge drinker, he couldn't hold his liquor. Like one drink and that guy was tipsy. Like he just really could not hold it. So the times that people said he was drunk, he might not have even had that much. All right, so we're on to Robert E. Lee. Here we go. Robert E. Lee is tough for me in judging this because, Dan Sickles is on this list, I think. Yeah, he's there. Are these only corps commanders and higher? Not strictly, because George Pickett's there and he was only division commander. But a lot of them mostly are, yeah. And there's some people missing. I mean, you don't have Nathan Bedford Forrest on the list. You don't have Joe Hooker, who was an army commander. All right. I don't think Chamberlain said much about Sickles. So here's the thing with Lee. Lee usually made the right decision when he was fighting defensively, which is easier, right? I mean, it's always easier to fight defensively than to go on the offense. So a guy like Grant had to constantly be on the offensive, had to constantly deal with political pressure telling him to be on the offensive, had to deal with crazy long supply lines, things like that. The 2 times that Lee went on the offensive in a campaign, it ended badly. Gettysburg and Antietam. Whereas people like Grant and most of the Union generals, for that matter, had to constantly be on the offensive. Lee did pretty well with the job that he had, but he had an easy job. I think Lee's overrated. I'm not saying he isn't a great general. He did well for the most part with the task he had, but I think if you flip roles, I think a lot of people do well in Lee's position. I think Everett hits it pretty accurately. Grant was a better strategist. Lee was a better battlefield tactician. I think that's a fair assessment. Yeah, I agree, Jordan. I think a lot of it's symbolism. A lot of it, the whole romanticism of things. Um, I can't put Lee at S. I just can't do it. I just don't think he did anything that a lot of other people couldn't have done. Like he doesn't stand out to me as being like, wow, nobody else could have pulled off what he did. I just don't think so. So I know that'll anger some people. And yeah, I think the war probably would have been over faster if you had somebody else in his position. So he did well with the task he was given. If you put him in command of the Union Army, the war's probably over in 1862. I don't doubt that. But if you put Grant in charge of the Union Army in 1862, I think the war's probably over in 1862. So he had to be defensive because of lack of numbers, but also because that was what he was doing. I mean, a whole part of the whole argument of the Confederacy is, hey, we just want to be left alone. Let us secede in peace. So to go on the offensive kind of flew in the face of that a little bit. Colin, thank you. Appreciate that. He did make some glaring mistakes, though, Andrew. I think he did. Obviously, Gettysburg, glaring mistake. He had no business even fighting at Gettysburg. Once after the first day, he should have pulled out and gotten between the Union Army and Washington. A.J. Smith and Sam Curtis, I do not think are on this list. Okay, we're on to James Longstreet, the janitor. A holdfast server, yeah. I actually have a holdfast server. We just haven't used it for a long time. But yeah, we're going to set something up. I could see Lee as a B tier. I wouldn't argue with that too much, I don't think. Yeah, we'll do a holdfast server. Yeah, I think if I had an A-, I'd probably put Lee there. What's happening in the Man City game? I'm not watching. Yeah. Okay. Longstreet. I can't think of a time he did poorly. He's a brigade commander at 1st Bull Run. Rises pretty quickly up to corps command, and that's where he kind of ends up the rest of the war. He did have an independent command at one point, I think, over in eastern Tennessee. I think he did pretty well. Unfairly demonized because he became a Republican after the war. I think he ended up the U.S. minister to Turkey, to the Ottoman Empire. I think it was for Hayes. And Hayes, of all people, was one of those generals and presidents that was hated in the South, although he did end Reconstruction. A lot of, and Longstreet waits until right at the end of his life, like early 1900, the first decade of the 1900s, when a lot of his detractors have died, and then he writes a memoir and slams a lot of those people. Tottenham's beaten Man City. But Longstreet's another A for me. He called him his old war horse. Longstreet, and I visited his grave, my same trip when I was in Georgia last spring. I got to visit Longstreet's grave. Okay, here we go. Philip, you have to understand, though, he became a Republican at a time when there were no Republicans in the South. At least not people who were born in the South. Republicans were the party of Lincoln. They were the party that prosecuted the Civil War. They were hated by the Confederates. So for Longstreet to become one was a pretty big deal. Yeah, Longstreet's solid beard. I agree. All right, McClellan. I am fully in the camp of McClellan hate. And part of my hate for McClellan, I won't use to judge him because it has nothing to do with him as a general and has everything to do with him as a person. He was not only not a good general, nobody thought he was a better general than he did. The arrogance of this man was second to none. I mean, some of the letters he wrote and the things he said about people like Lincoln and the way that he treated his commander-in-chief were just disgusting to me. And then he runs against Lincoln in 1864. He was the Democratic nominee for president. So not only a bad general, but an arrogant bad general. Good as a officer for training the army, but bad when he was expected to use that army. I honestly cannot think of a good thing to say about McClellan as a field commander. Actually using the army, he never did well. He wins at Antietam. It was really more of a draw, and it should have been an overwhelming victory. What did Lee have, like 38,000 engaged at Antietam? McClellan should have destroyed Lee's army at Antietam, and he didn't. He didn't do anything that lost the Union the war, but he could have won the war a couple years sooner, and I think hundreds of thousands of people died who didn't have to because of McClellan. He's an F for me. I'm sorry. Did become governor of New Jersey. His son, I want to say his son ended up like mayor of New York City or something. It's actually interesting how many of the sons of these guys ended up in the military. Like James Longstreet's got 2 sons buried at Arlington who are in the U.S. military. A lot of them do. David Dixon Porter had a son who received the Medal of Honor in the Army. Put him below F. Keep him at the bottom unranked list. The problem with McClellan being loved by his troops is that he loved his troops in return. And it goes back to that thing that Lee says, the character of Robert E. Lee says in the movie Gettysburg, when he's having a conversation with Longstreet on the first day. And he says, to be a good commander, you need to love the army. I think to be a good general, you have to be willing to order the death of the thing that you love. McClellan loved his army, but he wasn't willing to order the death of the thing that he loved. And that was what made him a bad general. Never send an engineer to do a military man's job. There were some decent engineer generals. But yeah, I mean, McClellan was terrible. Pemberton was an engineer, and he was terrible. I think Meade was an engineer, and he was pretty good. Start a new tier called McClellan. You know what? Just because you asked, I'm going to do it. Oh, wait. That's still F right there. Let's go back and... There you go. Nathan, catching up on what Nathan said. So you mentioned something about the platform. McClellan's personal view of the war and the Democratic Party's view of the war, their platform in 1864, I think were a little different. I think, I will say this, if McClellan had won the war, or had won the election in 1864, the North still wins the war. The only difference is, I think, Lincoln lives. But I don't think that McClellan being elected would have changed the outcome. Yeah, this will be great out of context. That's awesome. All right, make the color black. All right, let's do it. There we go. Now you can't see his name, but that's okay. All right, I think this is this Magruder? I think that's Magruder. Billy Hazard worked for the engineers. Yes, he did. Fictitious character, but I think this is John B. Magruder. Let me double check. Yep, that's Magruder. Yeah, Union victory was... And no, McClellan was not a copperhead. When you use all your skill points on arrogance. All right, so Magruder's another one of those kind of not really involved enough to get a full... Nathan, I think McClellan's approach to Reconstruction would have been better than Andrew Johnson's. I don't know how good it would have been, but he would have been the youngest president in history at that point. But boy, I struggle to, I shudder to think about what his arrogance would have meant for the White House. Who would win a boxing fight as president is interesting. McClellan did not want to make peace ASAP. The Democratic Party did, and he was a Democrat, but he had a different view than his party did. The merely failed to win tier. Magruder had some good moments, but I don't think he was that involved. I think the jury's out on him. He's going to be a C for me. A stick would have been better than Johnson. Okay, we're on to Lafayette McLaws. How old was McClellan? He was late 30s during the Civil War, I think. Let me see what year he was born. Because he went to West Point at like 16. He was really, really smart. Problem was he knew it. Yeah, so McClellan would have been 38 when he took office. He would still have been, to today, he would still have been the youngest president in history. Because he was born in December 1826. So he would have taken office in March of 65 when he would have been 38 years old. Yeah. McLaws was under Longstreet, who was under Lee. So he was under both. S-tier beard. Yeah, solid beard for Lafayette McLaws. McLaws is another one of those, like he never really rose to really high command. Solid division commander. I wouldn't even say he was an outstanding division commander, but he was a very good division commander. Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt was the youngest president ever. JFK was the youngest elected president. TR was vice president who became president. McLaws. It's tough because I'm putting him at B with a lot of guys who were of higher command. But where he was, he did well, I think. Not great, but not bad. He just never really got promoted. McClellan versus Grace Bedell in a boxing match. Grace Bedell was the girl who told Lincoln he should grow a beard. Yeah, Theodore Roosevelt's the youngest president ever. All right, here we go. James B. McPherson. So McPherson, everybody loved this guy. And I 100% guarantee you, if he hadn't been killed in Atlanta, would have become president of the United States. Everybody who knew him said he was going to end up president. Ridiculously intelligent, very solid commander at every level, was trusted highly by Grant, trusted by Sherman. Only Union Army commander killed during the war. Another Ohio guy. Sad story about McPherson. He was engaged to be married, and he had requested leave so he could get married, and his leave was denied, and then he was killed before he got a chance to get married. I think he was a good general, though, Max. I think McPherson was a good general. I can't think of a time he didn't perform well. He was the only good corps commander at Vicksburg. Certainly better than McClernand, who was just absolutely awful. McPherson, young guy, I think he was an engineer. I want to say finished first in his class at West Point. Let me double check that, but I'm almost positive he finished first in his class. Another young guy. He was only 35 when he was killed in Atlanta. Yeah, first in his class of 1853, which included Phil Sheridan, John Schofield, and John Bell Hood. And he was Corps of Engineer. Usually the guys at the top, the very top of their classes ended up engineers. People like Robert E. Lee, James McPherson, McClellan, people like that. I would say the majority of Union generals didn't have that strong of opinions when it came to slavery. McPherson, good question. I don't know enough about his politics to be able to say. My gut would say Republican because I think most of them were Republicans at the time. Yeah, Sherman wept openly when McPherson's death. Everybody, that's what I'm saying. I mean, McPherson had the rare quality of being intelligent, a good commander, and also really well liked. I can't think of anybody who didn't like James McPherson on both sides. Man City tied, huh? I know some of you seem to disagree with this, but McPherson's an A for me. I can't think of anything negative to say about him. I know I see some of you saying, "Oh, he shouldn't," he was deified because he died, and I get that, and I've observed that about other commanders, but I just can't think of any bad moments that McPherson had. And he pronounced it Birdsey, I think. Angry Ohioan. You look at it and it looks like bird's eye, but I think he pronounced it James Birdsey McPherson, if I remember right. It is a dope middle name. Okay. Snapping Turtle McGee, as they call it on Oversimplified. George Meade was a Pennsylvania man, and his nickname, a lot of people called him a damned old goggle-eyed snapping turtle. And you can see why. If you look at pictures of him, he kind of looked like a turtle. He really did. But Meade is criminally underrated as a general. Another guy who, for me, doesn't have any really negative spots on his record. Some people will argue, why didn't he pursue Lee after Gettysburg? And Lincoln was one of those people who was upset about that. But think about this. The man took command of the Army of the Potomac 3 days before the Battle of Gettysburg. 3 days. His army was spread out over 40 miles. It was all over the place. Lee was in Pennsylvania when he took command of the army. It could not have been a more difficult situation to be thrust into as an army commander. And this is a guy who less than a year earlier was a division commander. It wasn't like he had been a corps commander for the last year and a half. He goes from division command at Fredericksburg to being the army commander, 7 months later? Meade is a criminally underrated general. I don't think I can put him at S, but he's absolutely... And I've heard great things, Sir John Franklin, about the book Meade at Gettysburg. My friend Gary Edelman highly recommends that book. Meade's absolutely an A, even A+ for me. Yeah, he was born in Cadiz, Spain. Or is it Cadiz? I don't know. The one in Ohio is pronounced Cadiz. That's why I say it that way. Tottenham took the lead? No way. Crazy. Nathan, absolutely. He did something the other guys before him couldn't do, and that was soundly beat Robert E. Lee. He was the first guy to do it, and he did it 3 days after he took command of the Army. Meade, and Meade was good at every level. He didn't really get a chance to do much as a corps commander, but excellent division commander. He was probably the shining, the bright spot for the Union at Fredericksburg. Broke Stonewall Jackson's line at Fredericksburg, got no support to do it, or else he would have probably won that battle. You know what? I think we're going to make an A+ tier. Just so we can distinguish some of these a little bit. And we're going to put Lee there. Meade there. I'm going to put Claiborne there. And I'll put Longstreet there. Missouri Backwoods Fishing. Stand Waddy. Yes. Thank you for that, by the way. Hendricks, did you just say Meade didn't fare so well at Fredericksburg? I think Fredericksburg was one of his best moments. I'm not sure what you mean. He broke Stonewall Jackson's line at Fredericksburg, all basically by himself with no support. Yeah, absolutely true, Professor What. I absolutely have biases. I think we all do. Would be S if he didn't look like a turtle. Otis English, it's going great. How about yourself? All right, we're on to Dan the Man Sickles. I got to visit his grave when I was at Arlington. Dan Sickles. All right. Aiden Phillip. Meade was better than Lee, I think. All right, so Dan Sickles is interesting. He's a political general, another Democrat, war Democrat, as you would call them. They were Democrats who supported the war. Sickles is a congressman. A lot of you are familiar with his story. If you're not, let me give you the quick rundown. I've done some videos on this, but Sickles is a congressman before the war. He lives in Washington, D.C. as a congressman from New York. His wife is having an affair with... he was having affairs, too. His wife's having an affair with Philip Barton Key, who's the son of Francis Scott Key, the guy that wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. Philip Barton Key was the D.C. district attorney. Philip Barton Key makes the mistake of coming down to their house, like he's right across the street from the house, and he's like trying to get her attention. Like he's not throwing rocks at the window, but he might as well be. He's trying to like signal for her or something to come out. Sickles sees him out there, grabs a pistol, and goes out in broad daylight, like a block from the White House, in front of everybody, and murders Philip Barton Key right there on the street. We'll talk about the leg, yes. Sitting congressman murders the D.C. district attorney, who's the son of the guy who wrote what would become our national anthem, over a lover's quarrel, goes on trial, among other things, has the President of the United States, James Buchanan, show up at the trial and come over and shake his hand in this like epic moment. Pleads not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, and he wins. First time ever somebody successfully pleads temporary insanity. Gets away with it. And as for that one Grand Tactician campaign, then becomes a general. So during the American Civil War, one of the ways that you could become a high-ranking officer was that if you helped organize a unit. So let's say you raised on your own, you raised a regiment. You could end up the colonel in command of that regiment. And that happened a lot because there was a lack of officers. And so a lot of times officers got elected by their companies, things like that. So he raises a couple of regiments. These regiments eventually become, I think, known as the Excelsior Brigade. He becomes a brigade commander. And he rises his way up to corps command. And he rises through the ranks, by and large, as a pretty solid commander. Pretty aggressive, but solid. But if I were judging simply on the character of the man, I'd probably judge him differently. So what happens is, if you saw my video from the Chancellorsville battlefield, where I retraced the steps of Stonewall Jackson's flank attack, there's this moment that Jackson's corps is marching past a place called Hazel Grove. So at Hazel Grove, there's this place where Sickles' men are being fired on by Confederate artillery who have the high ground facing them. And so Sickles remembers that. A month and a half later, or I guess 2 months later, they get to Gettysburg. And he's ordered to hold his corps on the southern end of Cemetery Ridge at Gettysburg, on the left of Hancock's Second Corps. And he looks out and he sees the ground about, I don't know, maybe a half a mile in front of him is higher. And he's thinking about Hazel Grove. He's thinking about what happened the last time he was in battle. And he's thinking, I'm not going to let this happen to me again. I'm not going to let the Confederates get artillery on that high ground and shell my position. So he moves his corps forward. Lake County, very cool. Yeah, I'm in Mahoning County. Excuse me, right outside of Youngstown. So that's what his mindset was in moving his corps forward. Direct disobedience of an order. Disobeyed a direct order from Meade. Meade rides out and says, "What in the heck are you doing?" Probably didn't say it like that because he's snapping Turtle McGee. It probably chewed Sickles' head off, but right as he's confronting Sickles directly about it, Longstreet's attack happens, and it's too late to do anything. Sickles, despite all of that, and a lot of people say, well, his career was over at that point. His in-the-field career was over. Sickles stayed in the Army, and he's actually appointed as one of the district commanders in the South during Reconstruction. In command, they divided the South up into districts, similar to what happened in World War II, when they divided Germany up into zones of influence by different zones of control by different countries. And Sickles got command of one of those districts, military districts. And incredibly popular after war. Lives till like 1914. Goes to all the Gettysburg reunions. Sends his shattered leg, because he lost a leg at Gettysburg. Sends his leg to, I think, the Army Medical Museum, where he visits it for the rest of his life on the anniversary of losing it. So all kinds of cool this guy was. So big mistake at Gettysburg. But honestly, for me, Sickles, by and large, is a pretty solid commander. So that's all to say that I'm going to put him at B. Lee and Grant were never shot, though they both had some pretty close calls. There was a moment at Fredericksburg where a 30-pound parrot exploded not too far from Lee and darn near killed him and Longstreet both. Grant had a moment at Belmont, which was like his first battle in the Civil War, where he rides his horse, like in this dramatic moment, rides his horse across the planks and onto a ship. He's sitting in the cabin later on, and he's called up, to talk to the captain of the ship. He gets up, and right as he walks away, a bullet comes through and hits right in the spot where he had been sitting moments earlier. So pretty close. Sickles may have been a tiny bit nuts. Yeah. Forrest, I'm going to get to a couple of the generals who weren't mentioned, particularly Hooker and Forrest at the end, even though they're not here. So we'll talk about them. And I just realized that might be Sedgwick right there. I think Sedgwick had a longer beard later on in the war, but yeah, Sherman was wounded at Shiloh. Bump him up a tier simply for visiting his leg. Okay, I think this is Pemberton. That looks like John Pemberton. The drawing of him always looks so very different than pictures of him. But I'm pretty sure that I'm going to double check. But that looks like John C. Pemberton, which is going to be an easy one for me. Yeah, it's Pemberton. Easy. F. Favorite fast food place is Chick-fil-A, and we're getting one where I live. It opens next month. I'm so excited. How can I put Longstreet over Lee? Easily. I think Longstreet was a better commander than Lee. Longstreet didn't make any big mistakes. Lee made several. Can you imagine playing Civil War Guess Who and ask the question, does he have a beard? Who's my favorite English soccer club? It's West Brom, who played terribly again today. They haven't scored a goal in like 6 straight games. It's pretty awful right now. Yeah, Pemberton, awful. Had no business being in field command. He was an engineer. It was a favorite of Jefferson Davis. I don't even really need to say a lot about Pemberton. Just look at what he did at Vicksburg. It was bad. It was so bad. So bad. Grant made mistakes, but none of Grant's mistakes cost them any battles. He never got... I'll get to it when I talk about Grant. Yeah, Lee was in a position to make more mistakes than Longstreet, but I'm judging these people based on what they did with the commands they were given. So there were plenty of people who were corps commanders who did make mistakes. The Lord Perm, I actually have never worked in a field with my history degree. I actually went into youth ministry after college and did that for 14 years. I subbed occasionally, but that's about it. All right, we're on to Pickett. So George Pickett, interesting fellow. You know what? I can't think. He's one of those guys who I can think of some mistakes he made, and I can't think of any outstanding moments that he had. And by mistakes, I don't talk about Pickett's charge, as we call it, as being one of those, because that was 100% not his fault. He just did what he was ordered to do, and nobody was going to do well in that situation. Nobody. So Pickett for me, I'm trying. Maybe somebody can help me here. The stream's probably going to be, I would say, probably another half hour or 40 minutes. 5 Forks, yeah, was a bad moment for Pickett, but at that point, was anybody going to do well? I don't know if I can blame anybody for something that happened in the last week of the war in the East. Pickett's probably going to end up being a C for me because I can't think of anything great or anything real awful to say about him. And he's another one of those guys who didn't live very long after the war. He died, I think, in 1875. Okay, we're on to Leonidas Polk. Polk, the bishop. He was an Episcopal bishop. And pretty gruesome end for Leonidas Polk. Yeah, I'm not sure why. Pickett, they probably included Pickett because he's so well known. So Harry Kane scored, I just got a notification on my phone, scored in the 95th minute to snap Manchester City's 15-game unbeaten streak. Interesting. Leonidas Polk. The best thing Polk did was die. Wow. Harsh but fair. Harsh but fair. So Polk, the situation with Polk, him and Braxton Bragg are usually regarded as the two worst generals out west. Yeah, decent at Shiloh is fair. But so here's what happened with Polk at the end of his life. Polk was, I think, having a meeting with a couple other generals. And he gets spotted from a pretty far distance by, I think, Sherman and some of his other commanders. And Sherman, or someone, I'm remembering bits and pieces of this story, so you guys can help me with this. They call in basically an artillery strike on Polk's position. And he basically gets cut in half by like the first shot, or one of the first shots. It was really precision artillery job by these guys, and he gets hit in the side, and it basically goes like across his body and almost cuts him in half. It was pretty brutal what happened to him. Yes, I absolutely love English. So for those who aren't familiar with my teams, in the U.S., I'm a Columbus Crew fan. In England, it's West Brom. In Scotland, it's Rangers. And I'm still working on picking a team in Germany in the Bundesliga. Ethan Richards, thank you. And imagine how pissed George Washington would be with McClellan. Oh, man, he would make Charles Lee look competent. Yeah, that's accurate. Polk's death is something I see in my nightmares. Never had any paranormal experiences being at a battlefield. I can't say that I have, but I will say this. I've had moments at battlefields where I really felt the weight of what happened there. And you'll see that occasionally in my videos when I get to a place sometimes for the first time and it just hits me. Wow. I had one of those moments at Cold Harbor when I stood at the spot where that disastrous June 3rd attack happened. Like, I just felt the weight of that place. Some places I don't feel that. I felt it at Verdun, but I really felt it at the Somme. If you saw my first video from the Somme, you see the moment that really hits me. Standing where the Accrington Pals attacked and telling the story of the aftermath of that attack was pretty overwhelming for me. Pick Dortmund in Bundesliga. Speaking of Bundesliga, my Rangers did a number on Dortmund the other day. Yep, there it is. Zanman just said that. Bayern Munich, yeah, they've got Lewandowski. Sedgwick is the they couldn't hit an elephant at this distance guy. Hendricks, thank you. The story goes Johnston and Hardy went to see how they might organize their lines for retreat. Polk joined them to examine his own lines. Okay. I would recommend Shelby Foote's narrative. He's a good storyteller. Just understand going into it that he's coming at it from the perspective of a Southerner, so he's going to have a Southern bias. We all have biases. So as long as you recognize what his bias is and you read it with that in mind, then you're fine. I have not been to Fort Donelson, and I totally want to go to Fort Donelson. I had ancestors at Fort Donelson. That's right at the top of my list. I'm going to try to get there this year. I want to get down to Shiloh for the 160th anniversary of the Shiloh battle, the first week of April. So I might drive it and hit Fort Donelson on the way down. Do I know more about the World War or the Civil War? Definitely the Civil War. Okay, who are we on to? Oh, so Polk. I don't think Polk was quite Braxton Bragg level awful, but I'm going to give him a D. Who's my favorite soccer/football player? It was Matthias Pereira until he left West Brom to go to Al Hilal, and I don't forgive him for that. I understand why he did it, but so probably right now Sam Johnston for West Brom. If I'm thinking outside of my own team, well, on Columbus, the team I root for here in the States, Lucas Zellerayon's fantastic. Love him a lot. My plans for Eastern Europe, I definitely want to get to Eastern Europe. I want to go to Auschwitz. I want to go to Auschwitz. I'd love to go to Tannenberg. Messi. I do prefer Messi over Ronaldo. Andrew, I appreciate that. Thank you. Am I smart? I think I know a lot of stuff. I don't know. I guess. I haven't seen Encanto, but my kids have. Why name Fort Bragg after him is so bad? Great question. There's so many better generals we could have named a fort after than Bragg. All right, who we on? Is that Pope? That looks like John Pope. Let me double check. I'm pretty sure that's Pope. Yeah, that's Pope. Ibrahimovic, great player, can't stand him. Nobody thinks Ibrahimovic is a better player than Ibrahimovic does. I don't like him at all. Dude is so freaking arrogant. Like, it just really turns me off to him. I think smart is something you save other people to call you. Yeah, that's fair. All right, John Pope. John Pope is right up there with McClellan in arrogance. He's not quite McClellan level arrogance. If McClellan is an S tier for how great he thought he was, Pope's probably a solid A+. My wife has to appear more often. I will tell her you said that. We'll try to get her in some more streams. She does enjoy jumping in on the streams. Yes, some black soldiers did refuse pay because they were not getting paid the same. Hey, Addison, how's it going? Pope, I can't think of anything great Pope did. Pope, I don't think he was... I don't know if I'd put him F. He's definitely a D, though. Maybe even a D-. All right, this is one of the guys I wasn't sure. That might be Fitzjohn Porter. Let me take a look and see. Yep, that's Fitzjohn Porter. Okay. So let's talk about Fitzjohn Porter for a minute, because this is a guy who you don't hear a lot about, because he kind of drops off the radar after Antietam, and did pretty well early on, but got on the wrong side of things. So let's talk a little bit about exactly what happened. He was the 5th Corps commander. Yeah, the bell curve's working out so far, isn't it? Am I a Bengals fan? No, but I did root for him in the Super Bowl. I'm a Browns fan. So he's promoted to Major General in July of 1862 after Malvern Hill. He was kind of in charge at Malvern Hill because for most of those 7 days battles, McClellan, even though he was in command of the army, he was not present for a lot of those battles because they were kind of spaced out, the Corps. But Porter did pretty well, I think, at Malvern Hill. But not so good later on. So he gets court-martialed. He was arrested for his actions at Second Bull Run on November 25th. McClellan had been relieved, and so he couldn't kind of provide political cover for Porter. Porter was kind of a political favorite of Lincoln. So, yes, Harriet Tubman did lead a raid to free slaves during the Civil War. Porter's probably a C for me. The janitor. Hey, you're Porter? Nice. All right, this guy. Oh, gosh, he looks familiar, but I can't tell who he is. Somebody help me out with who this next guy is. Yeah, some of those colorized portraits look pretty cool. So somebody help me out with who this next one is. Yeah, Malvern Hill was easy ground for the Union. Kind of like, George Thomas gets all the credit for being the Rock of Chickamauga. And then you go to Chickamauga and you see the spot he was defending and you're like, gosh, I could have defended this place. Of course, he was the Rock of Chickamauga. I'll give him credit for holding when a lot of other people fled, but he was defending pretty easy ground to defend. Is that Prentice? That is Prentice. Benjamin Prentice. Okay. Thank you for that, Jacob. That is Benjamin Mayberry Prentice himself. Okay. Very cool. So Prentice, he's another one of those guys who, boy, there's not much to judge. Yeah, Europe provided a lot of weapons. One of the most popular weapons during the Civil War was the Enfield rifle, which I think was made in England, wasn't it? So Benjamin Prentice, he was captured at Shiloh and didn't really do much after that. I just feel like he's kind of an incomplete for me. I'm really not sure why he ended up on this list when a guy like Joe Hooker, who fought throughout the whole war, isn't on the list. So he's got to be a C just because it's like, I don't know. Mayberry, gotta love the middle name. Is that Harney at A? No, this is Meade, Claiborne. This is Meade, Claiborne, Longstreet, and then at A+, and then A is Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, and James McPherson. Does his middle name not bring Barney Fife to mind? Yes. There are a lot more generals than this. There were hundreds of generals in the Civil War. Probably on the list for the Hornet's Nest. That could be. That was a good moment for him. Hey, Michael, welcome. This will all be live on the channel later, so if you missed any part of this stream, you'll be able to catch it later on. What got me into history? When I was 8 years old, they found the Titanic, and that began the first of many historic rabbit holes that I've gone down during my life. All right, John Reynolds. So Reynolds is another one of those guys that you have to wonder what if about. Probably should have gotten command of the Army of Potomac. I believe was actually offered command of the Army of the Potomac before it was given to Meade. If I understand how this worked, basically the command was offered to Reynolds, who turned it down, and then Meade wasn't given the option to turn it down. He was ordered to take command. I believe that's kind of how that went down. But John Reynolds, another one of those guys, I can't think of any big holes in his resume. Pretty solid all the way along. Maybe somebody can help me out. Is there a reason to drop Reynolds as a commander? I mean, what negatives are there on his resume? Killed on the first day at the Battle of Gettysburg. Oh yeah, there were easily hundreds of generals. You got to remember there were thousands of regiments in the American Civil War. I want to say there were something like 400 Union generals during the war. Let's see. There were 560 Union generals. 220 were West Point graduates. Another number here says 583 Union generals and 425 Confederate generals. So there were about 1,000 generals in the Civil War. Oops. Let's see. There, I got it. Okay. Imagine trying to memorize all the Union generals, yeah. No, I don't believe that BS about Olympic being the real ship. Yeah, the last Civil War vet died in the late 50s. Okay, Reynolds is going to be an A for me. He's one of those guys like McPherson. I just can't think of anything negative to say about him as a commander. All right, William Rosecrans. Here's a guy who had some really solid moments and really awful moments too, both at the Army command level. I have a hard time with his performance at Chickamauga, though. And now, granted, Chickamauga was just I can think of a few words that I don't say that I could use to describe Chickamauga on both sides. But Rosecrans did not do well, and I can't excuse him fleeing from the battlefield before his army was off that field. But Rosecrans had some really good moments too. He had some solid moments on the battlefield, but he was like an extremes kind of guy. Like he was either really good or really bad. And Rosecrans was almost Lincoln's running mate in 1864. Man, imagine how the world would have been different if Rosecrans had been the guy. And I think Rosecrans was another Democrat. He was an Ohio Democrat, a war Democrat. Were the southern states known as Dixie's land? Yeah, that was a term that was used sometimes. Yeah, Chickamauga was rough, man, for Rosecrans. Yeah, that word, cynical optimist, one of the words definitely does begin with cluster when I think of Chickamauga. There, yeah, you guys got it. Rosecrans is tough for me because Chickamauga is just so bad. And he made the mistake that cost them that battle by creating a hole that wasn't there. Rosencrantz, yes, Rosencrantz is a character in Hamlet, isn't he? Only because he had some solid moments, I'm willing to give Rosecrans a B. But it's tough to overlook Chickamauga. I only excuse him a little bit for Chickamauga because I've been to that battlefield and I know just how tough it was to have any idea what was going on there. Okay. The highest ranking black Civil War soldier on either side. You weren't going to have any high ranking officers on the Confederate side. I believe, there were some officers, there were some black officers late in the war. Probably a low ranking field officer. I want to say maybe like a captain. I'd have to look it up. But there were some like kind of mid-grade officers that were black toward the end of the war. Very few though, because by and large blacks were not allowed to have the rank of officer during the war, but there were a few. Yeah, the conditions. If you ever go to Chickamauga, you couldn't see more than a regiment in any direction on most places of that field. All right, so we're on to Grant. Now, here's the thing. I've set a bit of a standard as far as ranking people and tending to rank people high who didn't make a lot of mistakes. Although I've got Lee up there at A, and he definitely made some mistakes. I have been to Andersonville. I have a video from Andersonville here on the channel, so check that out. Grant had some mistakes, to be sure. But a lot of Grant's mistakes, I can't think of any mistakes that Grant made that had a huge impact on the outcome of the war, or that set them back at all. Like for example, Rosecrans makes a mistake at Chickamauga that sets back the ability to move on Atlanta, for example. So it sets back the progress of the campaign in the West. Some of the generals in the Army of the Potomac make mistakes that prolong the war. I don't think any of the mistakes that Grant made prolonged the war. He did make some mistakes. But for me, Cold Harbor was a mistake, yes. But number one, I don't blame Grant for a lot of that. I think a lot of that disastrous June 3rd attack is on the Corps commanders and not on Grant. Now, granted, I'm a huge fan of Grant, and so I'm tending to give him the benefit of the doubt that I don't give to other people. But I put a lot of that on the Corps commanders. But for me, Grant is the first S. Vicksburg campaign is the most brilliant campaign of the war on either side. There's nothing like it. What they did from the time they landed on the Mississippi side of the river in May to the time they take Vicksburg is brilliant, is absolutely brilliant. The whole throwing men at the enemy thing, I get it. But Lee threw men at the enemy that he didn't have. I mean, what is Pickett's charge but throwing men at the enemy? That was an absolute waste of men. What was Longstreet's assault over awful ground on the right on July 2nd except throwing men at the enemy? Plenty of generals threw men at the enemy like that. Grant's actually accomplished something. He knew his enemy didn't have the men to replace it. Grant's got to be an S for me. He did get arrested for speeding. I think Mr. Beat did a video about that. Missouri Backwoods Fishing, thank you. How would I rank Custer during the war? He goes like right from captain to brigadier general because he actually graduated West Point early. They graduated a West Point class in May of 61, and then the junior class graduated in June of 61. They bumped them up a year to get those officers in the field. And so Custer's right out of West Point. As a staff officer, gets bumped all the way up from a staff officer to brigade command. Did really well in the Civil War. People think of Custer and they think of what happened in the Plains Indian Wars, in the Sioux War, but they forget he was really pretty brash at times. You want to talk about a guy who threw his men at the enemy? Custer could be accused of that at times. Of course, Grant lost more men. Grant was on the attack the entire war. Lee was on the defensive. That's just the nature of what was happening. All right. Is this Sedgwick? I think this is Sedgwick. Yeah, John McElroy's ghost. He did his brother Tom, who was killed with him at Little Bighorn. Another place on my list that I'm hoping to get to this year is the battlefield at Little Bighorn. His brother Tom did receive the Medal of Honor twice. Sedgwick. Another solid commander. Jason, holy cow, dude. Thank you so much. I'm grateful. I really appreciate that. That means a lot. Was Pickett nominated by Lincoln to go to West Point? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Lincoln was not in a position to have nominated Pickett to West Point. I don't think. Because those nominations typically came from your congressman, and Pickett was from Virginia, and Lincoln was a one-term congressman from Illinois. Maybe I'm wrong. Jason equals 2 Grants. Yeah, that's right. Sedgwick, solid commander. Another one of those guys. He never rises to... He was actually the highest-ranking Union general killed during the war. He was a corps commander, so a lot of people will say that McPherson was the highest-ranking Union officer because he was an Army commander. But Sedgwick actually outranked McPherson based on the date of his promotion. But what do I know most about the Civil War? Sedgwick's good. He's a good general. Loved by his men, but also solid in the field. They called him Uncle John Sedgwick. He commanded the 6th Corps of the Army of the Potomac. So, I mean, if somebody can maybe throw me a reason why I shouldn't rank Sedgwick pretty high. His last words were, they couldn't hit an elephant at this distance, though contrary to how it sometimes spun, he was not in the middle of the sentence when he was hit. It happened a little bit after that. Lewis Armistead's not on the list. He was only a brigade commander. I'm looking it up about West Point because I can't believe that's not something I wouldn't have known. Okay, well. All right, so here's the deal. Pickett did live in Springfield, Illinois, where he studied law. He was appointed to the U.S. Military Academy at the age of 17. The story that he was appointed by Abraham Lincoln was circulated by Pickett's widow after his death, but there's no evidence that's actually the case. let's take a look here. He did give young George Pickett advice after he was accepted. He was appointed by Illinois Congressman John Stewart, who was a friend of Pickett's uncle and a law partner of Lincoln. So there are some connections there, and Lincoln and Pickett did know each other before the war. And it sounds like Pickett got some advice from Lincoln, but it was Lincoln's law partner who actually appointed him. So that's cool. I did not know that. I learned something from you guys, so very cool today. How long did I study? I've been studying the American Civil War all my life. John McElroy's ghost. Lincoln did not offer the command to Lincoln or to Lee directly. They didn't meet face to face. I believe it was offered to Lee by Blair. I want to say it was Blair, who was a member of Lincoln's cabinet, who offered it to him. Yeah, this is the longest stream we've done in a while. How long have we been going? I'm trying to find where it says. There's somewhere that says how long the stream is. Anyway. Yeah, there's always like a kernel of truth that's blown out of proportion. I'm going to make Sedgwick a B. I don't know if he rises to the A level for me, but I can't think of any great drawbacks for him. All right, who are we on to? Phil Sheridan, the little general. He was a small guy, definitely trusted by Grant. Grant is really largely responsible. Oh, so 2 hours, okay. What time is it in my part of America? It is 3:05 Eastern Time. We'll probably go for maybe another 20 minutes, half hour or so. Sheridan, I think probably is rated higher than he otherwise might be because Grant thought so highly of him. I'm trying to do more streams, Professor What, so I don't mind you guys monopolizing my time. I'm trying to do this more often. And tomorrow we're going to do a stream. I'll announce the time shortly, but I'm going to do a patron and members only stream tomorrow. We're going to play some Kahoot together tomorrow. I got to find out what time my son's last soccer game is so I can schedule that stream. Yes, the tank Sheridan. U.S. tanks are named after generals. Yeah, Sheridan was kind of a jerk to Indians after the war, like a lot of people was. I don't think Sheridan is as great as a lot of people give him credit for, but I don't think he ever did anything particularly bad. I just don't think he had a huge impact on the war as some of these other guys. And I will say this, I think he overreacted in relieving Gouverneur Warren of command. I think Warren was in command of the 5th Corps late in the war, and Sheridan relieved him because he didn't think he was being aggressive enough. And that was eventually confirmed by a military court-martial, I think, determined years later that Sheridan was out of line in relieving Gouverneur Warren. So I'm going to make Sheridan a B. He did well, but late in the war, he really kind of only comes on the scene in a really impactful way in 1864. Cynical Optimist, thank you for that. And the Sherman gets an S tier for sizzling south. And yeah, you could judge a lot of these guys on character outside of the war, and Sheridan rightfully should be criticized for his policies toward Native Americans after the war, but that's not what I'm judging these guys on. All right, we're on to Sherman. Sherman and Grant kind of go hand in hand. And Sherman and Grant, either one of them very easily could have ended up out of the war just as it was getting started. There were moments where both of those guys probably were done. Grant, after Shiloh, was lambasted. I mean, Grant had a heck of an 1862 because He takes Fort Donelson, and it's the first big success for the Union in the war. And the newspapers in the North are singing his praises, unconditional surrender, Grant. They show a picture of him with a cigar, and so he starts getting tens of thousands of cigars sent to him, and everybody's singing Grant's praises. And then Shiloh happens, which is a victory for Grant, but it's bloodier than any battle by far in U.S. history, and people are just horrified by the casualties. And Grant gets lambasted for that in the press, and Halleck comes and takes over the army, and Grant figures he's done. He's like, I'm going home, forget this. But it's Sherman who becomes friends with Grant after Shiloh, who tells him, stick around, wait and see what happens, kind of talks him into staying rather than going home and giving up on the war. And it's that keeps Grant in the army. And Sherman, at the same time, had a real severe bout with mental health, was quite suicidal. And it was Sherman who would go on to say, I stuck by Grant when he was drunk, and he stuck by me when I was crazy. And now we stand by each other always. So Sherman's, for the nature of the Civil War, Sherman was exactly the kind of general that the Union needed. I can't, again, think of any negatives. He was a good division commander, probably as good as any division commander at Shiloh. Served really well as a corps commander, like during the Vicksburg campaign. Sherman was really solid as a corps commander. Yeah, he was a little off, I would say. Lost a son during the war, not because of the war, but to illness, a young son. But I'll give him an A+. I think Grant and Sherman, better than any other generals, understood what was necessary to win the war. I'm just catching up on the chat here a little bit. All right, who is this? This guy looks familiar, but I'm drawing a blank on who he is at the moment. That's not. Nah. I think I know who that is. Somebody help me out with who this Confederate general is. Don't make me come down there again. Sherman shirt. Is that Kirby Smith? All right. Edmund Kirby Smith. Not to be... Now, here's where it gets really confusing. Yeah, that's who that is. I'm just used to seeing him. There's a picture of him facing the other direction and with, I think, a little more hair. There was a Union general named Kirby Smith with a hyphenated Kirby Smith, I think it was. So Edmund Kirby Smith's another one of those highs and lows kind of guy for me. Had some pretty solid moments and some not so solid moments. So I'm going to put him in at a C. So who do we got left? We have Jeb Stewart. Who's that guy there? The other two are George Thomas and Winfield Scott Hancock. Trying to figure out who the second guy is here. Is that Keyes? No, it's not Keyes. I think it's another one of those Union Corps commanders that I forget about. I do live in Ohio. Somebody help me out with who the second guy is here. My allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. Thrown in the Star Wars quote for a Union soldier. Nice. I could do a Founding Fathers one sometime. Is that Sumner? Is that who that is? All right, it was one of those Union Corps commanders in the East. Edwin Sumner. Okay. Yep, it's Edwin Sumner. Okay. All right, so we've got Jeb Stewart, Edwin Sumner, George Thomas, and Winfield Scott Hancock left. Jeb Stewart, solid, but man, Gettysburg is a big black mark on that man's resume. Glory hunting when he should have been screening for the Army. Jimmy Lee, thank you. I appreciate that. Am I going to watch the Buzz Lightyear movie? I don't know. My kids are a little old for that, but we'll see. Jeb Stewart, I don't think he's quite as great as people give him credit for. He's going to be a B for me. And that's going to anger some Southern apologists, I'm sure. But he had some good moments. Edwin Sumner. Sumner's another one of those guys that you kind of see a lot early on, but then drops off the face of the earth, and that's because he died. He was one of the oldest generals in the Army. He was born in the 1790s. So by the time the war even breaks out, he's already at retirement age. He was known as Bull Sumner. He had a big booming voice, and legend has it that a musket ball once bounced off his head. So that's kind of some of the reasons why he gets nominated, he gets given that name. He dies at the age of 66 in the spring of 1863. His last battle was Antietam. I think he commanded one of the grand divisions at Fredericksburg. Was he the guy? He wasn't the guy on the left at Fredericksburg, was he? Let me take a look real quick. So Sumner had some bad moments, like at Antietam was a bad moment for him. McClellan didn't like him. They didn't get along well at all. Sumner was the right Grand Division. So he was in command of the troops that attacked at Marie's Heights. The Ranking with Mr. Beat will be a live stream on Monday on his channel. And we're going to probably do one on my channel down the road later on. Sumner, mixed bag, doesn't perform well in some moments. Okay, a little bit in other moments. I'm just going to throw him in at C. We've got two left, George Thomas and Winfield Scott Hancock. So, Thomas, for me, one of my favorite moments about George Thomas, of course, would have to be Chickamauga. Now, I will temper the whole praise of George Thomas being the Rock of Chickamauga with the fact that if you visit the Chickamauga battlefield and you see where he made his stand, it was pretty darn easy to defend such a position. But George Thomas was also the only Corps commander left on the battlefield because the Army commander and the other Corps commanders had fled back to Chattanooga. And he was the only guy who had the guts to stand and fight when those guys fled. And so I give him a lot of credit for that. I give him a lot of credit for being a Virginian who sided with the Union when most of the men of his state did not. Janine, thank you for that. Your dad was a Grant during basic in Georgia. Very cool. He thanked God he wasn't a Sherman. So Thomas, high marks. Now, Grant, in his autobiography, has some criticism for George Thomas, and that shouldn't be taken lightly because Grant doesn't generally criticize people in his autobiography. And when he does criticize them, he also tries to say 3 good things about them, or he tries to understand why they did those things he's criticizing them for. What he says about Thomas is that Thomas was really good if you were defending. In fact, there might not be a better general if you were on the defensive. But when you need somebody to be aggressive, to go on the attack, Thomas wasn't your guy. And that was kind of what was needed late in the war. So Thomas, a lot of people would probably rank him higher than I would. I'm going to put Thomas at B for those reasons. No real bad moments on Thomas's record. Hey, from Hampshire in the UK. Very cool. I might even be willing to... You know what? I'm going to put him A. I don't have a lot of A's. I'll make Thomas an A. Solid general. Probably not as aggressive as he needed to be. And for a guy like Sherman, whose command he was serving under, that probably didn't sit well with Sherman, who liked to be super aggressive. I'm sure he was hated in Virginia. All right, we've got one left. He's known as Hancock the Superb. And it's interesting to me that Hancock, of all the Union Corps commanders, that he never rises to Army command at some point. Really solid Corps commander. Can't think of anything negative to say about him. His men loved him. Generals thought highly of him. Had a very strong presence on the battlefield. There's that moment that you see at Gettysburg where the cannonade is happening. There are artillery shells flying everywhere. Men are laying down trying to avoid being hit by this massive artillery bombardment, and Hancock's riding around on his horse. And he's being told, get down, and he says there are times when a Corps commander's life does not count. He recognized the importance of inspiring his men, but when it came to it, he also knew how to lead those men on the battlefield. Solid general. I can't think of anything negative to say about Hancock, and so if I'm going to put Reynolds at A, I have to put Hancock there too. So that's where we're at. So I'll just, again, I've got Grant at S, Meade, Claiborne, Longstreet, and Sherman at A+, and then my A's are Jackson, Lee, McPherson, Reynolds, Hancock, and Thomas. And by the way, if you've ever seen the movie Gettysburg, the soldier who comes over and tells Hancock, sir, we cannot spare you, get down from your horse, in that scene is Ken Burns, the guy who made the documentary. That's him in that scene. Hancock is the Democratic nominee in 1880 for president, narrowly loses the election to James Garfield, a fellow general and Civil War veteran. Yes, let's talk about Hooker and what's his name? Forrest. We'll do those two. Jimmy Lee, thank you. Delayed by bad weather at Nashville. Yeah, that's fair. His family turned all his portraits to the wall, and the South never forgave him siding with the Union. Yeah, I get it. All right. So let's talk about Joe Hooker. I think Hooker was a pretty good general. And he's one of those rare guys who gets fired as Army of the Potomac commander, but then comes back and does some really good things. Did really well at Chattanooga, I think. Had some good moments. Had some maybe not so great moments too. But I think Hooker, most people when they're thinking of Hooker, they think of Chancellorsville. And Hooker should have stepped down at Chancellorsville. He got his bell rung pretty good by an artillery shell that hit his headquarters. And he was just out of it for the rest of that battle. He should have stepped down and let somebody else take over. Maybe someone like Reynolds. But what war do I know most about Civil War? It is 3:22 p.m. In Ohio. The most recent person born in Europe in my family tree is 1842. My great-great-great-grandfather born in Tipton and outside of Birmingham. So Hooker, I think, was a good general. Not great. Had some bad moments, the worst of which is Chancellorsville. But again, that was a situation where he just got his bell rung and just was out of it and just didn't do well after that. So Hooker for me is going to be a B. I would put Hooker at B. But yeah, you guys can go back and watch this whole thing later on. And then let's talk a little bit about Nathan Bedford Forrest. Forrest Starts out as a private, but he was wealthy. He was probably a millionaire. Big in the slave trade, and uses his wealth to raise some troops and gets promoted. Eventually rises to lieutenant general. I think probably the best Confederate commander of high rank in the West. Probably the best equivalent to Custer that the Confederates had a ton of horses shot out from under him. Very reckless on the battlefield. Of course, everybody knows after the war he is kind of a grand wizard of the Klan. Eventually kind of repudiates the Klan and speaks out against them. So definitely polarized. You're in Staffordshire. Very cool. Yeah, not far from Tipton at all. And then I had another great-great-grandfather on another line of my family who came from Birmingham. His family, they lived in the jewelry quarter in Birmingham. In fact, their family went to the St. Martin in the Bullring Church is where my family went to church in Birmingham. T. Britt, thank you. Appreciate that. So I would probably also put Forrest at B. So I'm definitely planning on visiting Birmingham when I get to the UK, which is hopefully going to be this spring. So Jimmy, thank you for that. He resigned from Sherman's army after Logan was promoted to command after McPherson was killed. Absolutely 100, right? Hey, John Buford, okay, let's rank Buford. He's not in there. Buford would be an A for me. Buford, really, really good general who should have been given command of the Union cavalry in the Army of the Potomac instead of Pleasanton. And I think even the general who was responsible for Pleasanton would acknowledge later I think that was Hooker, acknowledged later it should have been Buford. Buford was really, really good commander. He'd be an A for me. Bromley Lowe, thank you, appreciate that. And I will forgive the fact that you said go Ravens. Awesome. I had an ancestor in the 20th Ohio under Sherman. He was actually in McPherson's corps, served in that army. Awesome. So thank you guys so much. Hope you guys enjoyed that stream. Join us for the stream 3 p.m. Eastern time on Monday. It'll be on Mr. Beat's channel. If you turn on your notifications here, I will remind you guys about that. Arthur MacArthur was not a general. He was like a lieutenant in 1864. He ended up a colonel late in the war. He wasn't a general, though. Kidderminster. I know where Kidderminster is. Nice. So we're going to wrap it up right there. Thank you, guys. We'll see you on Monday for the stream. Tomorrow there will be a stream for patrons and members. So it's not too late to sign up as a member, preferably Patreon. I prefer it there. But on a member here as well. We'll be doing a stream tomorrow just for you guys. Thank you, guys. Have a great weekend.